Welcome to my YouTube channel. The shadows behind the mansion. The morning light crawled across the massive white mansion like liquid gold. The property stretched across 5 acres of lush garden, guarded by iron gates and silence, the kind of silence only the rich could afford. Inside, Ethan Hayes, the janitor, carried his old mop and bucket through the hallway. He wore faded blue overalls, the same pair he'd had for years, and his calloused hands gripped the handle as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. He'd been working at the Whitmore estate for 6 months now, one of the grandest homes in the city. The millionaire owner, Charles Whitmore, rarely visited. Most of the time, the mansion was run by staff, a chef, a gardener, a few maids, and one nanny for Charles's only daughter, Grace. Grace was 6, fragile, quiet, and far too thin for a child surrounded by such wealth. Ethan had noticed it the first week he started. Her eyes, big and blue, always seemed to carry fear instead of laughter. A single father's struggle. Ethan wasn't supposed to get close to anyone here. He was just a janitor, the man who fixed broken things. But every time he saw Grace sitting alone near the fountain, her knees pulled up to her chest, something in him broke a little more. He knew that look, the kind of silence that came from pain no one else could see. Because his own daughter, Lily, had worn the same expression once. It had been 2 years since his wife died in a car crash, leaving him with Lily, who was only 10 at the time. He'd lost his job at the construction company shortly after. Too many absences, too much grief. When he finally found this janitor job, it was the first stable income they'd had in months. Every evening, he'd pick up Lily from school, and they'd walk home together, a small rented apartment that smelled like detergent and hope. She always asked about his day, and he'd tell her about Grace, how quiet she was, how much she reminded him of her. "Maybe she needs a friend," Lily said once, smiling softly. "Maybe you can help her, Daddy." He wished it were that simple. The nanny. The first time Ethan met Olivia Crane, the mansion's nanny, he'd felt something unsettling about her. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, always dressed in designer clothes that didn't match her job title. Her smile never reached her eyes. She had this way of speaking to the staff that made their skin crawl, a mix of superiority and venom hidden under politeness. "Mr. Hayes," she said one morning, standing near the staircase as Ethan mopped the floor. "You missed a spot. We can't have the floors look poor, can we?" Her tone was dripping with mockery. Ethan forced a polite smile. "I'll take care of it, She tilted her head, watching him for a moment before walking away, her heels clicking like a metronome of cruelty. But the real unease began a few weeks later. Cry in the hallway. It was late, well past 9 p.m. Most of the staff had gone home, and Ethan was finishing up the east wing. That's when he heard it, a faint cry echoing through the marble corridor. At first, he thought it was the wind. But then, the sound came again, a soft whimper, muffled, like someone was trying to hide it. He followed it quietly, his heart pounding. The sound led him to the nursery, the one room he never entered, Olivia's domain. Through the half-open door, he saw Grace, standing in the corner, trembling. Her little hands were clutching her doll, and tears streaked down her cheeks. Olivia stood in front of her, face twisted in rage. "What did I tell you about touching my perfume?" Olivia hissed, her hand raised. I didn't," Grace whispered, voice breaking. "Don't lie to me." The slap echoed down the hallway. Ethan froze. His fists clenched around the mop handle so hard his knuckles turned white. He wanted to storm in, to protect that little girl. But he hesitated. If he got caught interfering, he could lose his job. And without it, Lily would suffer too. He took a step back, eyes burning with silent fury. Olivia's voice dropped, venomous and cold. "You tell anyone about this, and I'll make sure your father forgets you even exist. You're a spoiled little burden." Ethan's jaw tightened. That was enough. He pushed the door open slightly, pretending to mop near the entrance. Olivia spun around instantly, her expression flipping into a false smile. "Oh, Mr. Hayes," she said sweetly, "you're still here." "Just finishing up," Ethan replied, pretending not to have seen anything. But his gaze flicked to Grace, who quickly turned her face away. Olivia leaned against the doorframe, her voice dropping into a whisper only he could hear. "Curiosity can be dangerous, you know. Best you stay out of rooms that aren't yours." He stared at her, that same quiet stare that made grown men nervous, but he said nothing. The camera. The next day, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what he saw. Grace came to breakfast with a faint bruise on her cheek. Olivia smiled through the entire meal like nothing had happened. That night, Ethan went home, his heart heavy. Lily noticed. "Something wrong, Daddy?" she asked, putting down her homework. He hesitated. "Just, someone I know isn't being treated right." Lily frowned. "Then help them. You always tell me doing nothing makes you part of the problem." Her words hit him like a punch. So that night, Ethan made a decision. The next morning, he arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. In his maintenance toolbox, between a wrench and a roll of duct tape, he'd hidden a small spy camera he'd bought years ago to monitor his apartment for safety. He waited until the staff had scattered through their morning chores. Then, as Olivia took Grace out to the garden, Ethan slipped into the nursery and placed the camera inside the air vent, pointed directly toward the play area. He tested it with his phone. Clear image, sound included. For the next few days, he watched in secret. What he saw made his blood boil. Olivia's cruelty wasn't occasional. It was routine. She'd scold Grace for the smallest mistakes, spilling juice, forgetting to say thank you, or crying too loudly. Sometimes, she'd lock her in the corner for hours. Ethan couldn't believe the millionaire father had no idea. A fractured angel. One afternoon, Ethan was repairing a broken window latch near the study when he saw Grace again, sitting on the stairs, staring at her knees. He gently approached. "Hey, Grace. That's a beautiful doll you have." She looked up slowly, hesitant. "Her name's Clara." Ethan smiled softly. "That's a lovely name. Does she make you happy?" Grace's lips trembled. "Sometimes." He knelt down beside her, careful not to scare her. "You know, when my daughter was your age, she had a doll too. It helped her when she was sad." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Do dolls talk back?" Ethan froze. "What do you mean?" She shrugged weakly. "Clara says to be brave, even when it hurts." He wanted to hold her, to protect her, but he knew if Olivia saw them together, she'd twist it somehow. So he just smiled gently. "That's good advice. Clara sounds smart." Grace gave a tiny nod, then hurried away when she heard footsteps. Olivia appeared seconds later, her smile venomous. "Mr. Hayes, perhaps next time you'll remember your place. The staff aren't here to bond." Ethan stood, meeting her gaze. Maybe the staff care more than the people who should. Her smile faltered. For the first time, she saw the fire in his eyes. The breaking point. 2 nights later, the storm came. Thunder rolled over the mansion, and the lights flickered. Most of the staff had left early due to the weather, but Ethan stayed behind to check for leaks. That's when he heard it again, Grace's voice. A cry. Then a scream. He dropped his flashlight and ran. The nursery door was locked. He kicked it open with one powerful strike. Inside, Olivia stood over Grace, her hand mid-swing. Grace's lip was bleeding. Her doll was torn apart on the floor. Something inside Ethan snapped. "Enough!" he roared. Olivia spun around, startled. "You!" He stepped forward, eyes blazing with rage. "Touch her again, and I swear you'll regret it." Olivia smirked, though fear flickered behind her eyes. "You'll lose your job for this, janitor." Ethan didn't flinch. "Maybe, but at least I'll be able to sleep tonight." He reached for Grace, gently lifting her into his arms. She clung to him, shaking, whispering, "Please don't let her hurt me." Ethan's voice softened. "She won't. Not anymore." Olivia's composure cracked. "You think you can just take her? You're nothing here." Ethan turned toward her, his voice low and deadly calm. "Then let's see what happens when I show the police what you've done." Her smirk vanished. He reached into his pocket beside her. "I'm not leaving you, but we need to be smart." 4. Framed. Within the hour, 2 security men entered the property. Hired guards, unfamiliar faces. They didn't look at Ethan. They only followed Olivia's orders. Olivia wore a perfect mask of innocence. "Check his quarters," she said. "I found something suspicious." They stormed into the janitor's small room beside the garage and emerged minutes later holding a bottle of wine and a tiny silver bracelet. Olivia gasped theatrically. "That's Grace's bracelet. He must have taken it." Ethan's voice cracked. I didn't. This is insane. The taller guard stepped forward. Sir, you're trespassing now. Pack up and leave. Grace clung to Ethan's leg. Please, don't make him go. But Olivia knelt and wrapped her arms around the child. Sweetheart, he scared you, remember? He shouldn't have come into your room. Grace shook her head wildly. No. She. Enough, Grace. Olivia snapped, forcing a sweet smile again when the guards looked. She's confused. Ethan knew arguing was useless. He turned to Grace, whispering, I'll fix this. I promise. Then he left the mansion under the heavy stare of security cameras and the weight of betrayal. 5. The fall. By evening, word had already spread among the staff. The janitor crossed a line. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted trouble. Ethan packed his few belongings into his old truck and drove back to his apartment. When Lily opened the door, she saw his face and knew. You lost your job, didn't you? He nodded, exhausted. But it's worse than that, Lil. They're hurting that little girl, and now they've made me look like a criminal. Lily's jaw set, fierce and protective. Then we show them the truth. He smiled faintly. You sound like your mother. 6. The first spark of karma. The next morning, Ethan went to the police station with the video file. But when the officer played the footage, the file showed only static. Corrupted. He stared at the screen in disbelief. How? I checked it yesterday. Sir, the officer said, uninterested. Without proof, it's just a story. And accusing someone of child abuse without evidence could land you in trouble. You might want to leave it alone. Ethan left the station numb. He had one copy left, the one hidden in his boot. He stopped at a cafe to think. On the muted television inside, a news ticker scrolled. Businessman Charles Whitmore returns home amid family health concerns. He was back in town, and Olivia wouldn't be able to hide forever. 7. Grace's silence. At the mansion, Grace sat at the breakfast table staring at untouched pancakes. Charles Whitmore, tall and severe in a grey suit, paced near the window. Olivia tells me Ethan frightened you, he said, voice soft but distant. Is that true, darling? Grace swallowed hard. Her hands trembled. She wanted to tell him everything, but Olivia stood right behind her, her hand gently resting on Grace's shoulder, a silent warning. Grace forced a whisper. I don't know. Charles sighed. I'll handle it. Don't think about him anymore. Olivia smiled. Of course, Mr. Whitmore. She's still shaken. I'll make sure she rests. Grace looked down, tears falling into her lap. 8. A father's plan. That night Ethan sat at his kitchen table with Lily, laptop open, staring at the corrupted video file. He wasn't ready to give up. I know computers a bit, Lily said. Let me try. Hours passed. Lines of code scrolled. Finally, the image flickered, then cleared. Olivia's hand striking Grace. Audio intact. Ethan exhaled in relief. You're a genius. Lily grinned. I get that from Mom. Ethan uploaded the clip to a private cloud and saved new copies. Then he called a number from an old contact, Maria Lopez, a journalist who once covered corporate scandals. Maria, it's Ethan Hayes. I have a story you'll want. 9. Olivia's crack show. Back at the mansion, Olivia's control began to slip. Grace had nightmares every night, screaming Ethan's name. Charles grew impatient. What's happening to her? He demanded one morning. She was fine before I left. Olivia feigned concern. Children get attached to people who manipulate them. Ethan was unstable. But Charles wasn't convinced anymore. He'd reviewed security logs. Ethan hadn't entered Grace's room until the night of the storm. Why would he break in then? Doubt crept into his mind. Olivia noticed and doubled down, organizing charity events, flooding the father with distractions. Yet the cracks were showing. And karma was already walking up the driveway. 10. The confrontation to come. 2 days later, Maria Lopez arrived at Ethan's apartment with a camera crew. Are you sure about this? She asked. This will go public. Ethan nodded. I don't care what happens to me. She just can't keep hurting that child. Maria uploaded the footage to her network's legal team for verification. Within 24 hours, the story was scheduled for national broadcast. Whistleblower Janitor exposes abuse inside billionaire's mansion. But Olivia had eyes everywhere. She received a message from one of the mansion's IT staff. Someone leaked a video with your name on it. That night she packed her things quietly, but not before confronting Grace one last time. You think he saved you? She hissed. People like him always lose. Grace didn't answer. She just clutched Clara the doll and whispered, You already lost. 11. The twist of fate. When the segment aired the next morning, the internet exploded. Clips of Olivia's abuse looped on every screen. Comment sections filled with outrage. Charles Whitmore's company stocks dipped overnight. Police cars arrived at the estate before breakfast. Olivia tried to flee, but Grace, braver than ever, pointed to her and said clearly, She did it. Olivia's face drained of color as officers placed cuffs on her wrists. This is a mistake. He framed me. Ethan stood at the gate, Lily beside him, silent. One of the officers nodded to him respectfully. Mr. Hayes, your statement helped a lot. As Olivia was led into the car, she turned to Ethan, hatred in her eyes. You ruined me. Ethan met her gaze calmly. No, you did that yourself. 12. But karma isn't done yet. Days later, Charles Whitmore requested a private meeting with Ethan. He arrived at Ethan's modest apartment, not the setting of power he was used to. I misjudged you, he said quietly. I saw what you did for my daughter. I can never repay that. Ethan shook his head. Just be there for her. That's all she needs. Charles looked humbled. She keeps asking about you. Would you consider staying, this time, as her official caretaker? Ethan smiled faintly. I'll think about it. Right now, I just want to make sure she heals. He turned to Lily, who was beaming. See, told you truth wins. But outside, the world wasn't done testing them. Olivia's downfall was only the start. Behind the Whitmore fortune, darker secrets still waited to surface. Secrets that would drag everyone into a storm far worse than before, quiet after the storm. The days after Olivia's arrest were strangely quiet. The Whitmore mansion, once echoing with polished footsteps and artificial laughter, now carried the soft hum of recovery. Grace was back in her room, walls repainted, the bruises fading. Yet something inside her hadn't healed. At night, she still woke up screaming, calling for Ethan. Charles Whitmore tried his best, expensive therapists, doctors, tutors, but nothing worked. Money couldn't erase fear. So one afternoon, he did something that surprised even himself. He called Ethan. 2. Returned to the mansion. Ethan stood at the iron gates again, wearing the same faded jacket, his old toolbox in the truck. But this time, he wasn't there to clean floors. Grace saw him from the window and ran, her little shoes slapping the marble floor, hair flying. She jumped straight into his arms before he could say a word. Ethan, you came back. He hugged her tightly. I told you I would. Charles stood behind them, hands in his pockets, eyes heavy with guilt. I owe you an apology, Mr. Hayes. I was blind. Ethan set Grace down gently. You were busy being a father and a businessman. Sometimes it's hard to see what's right in front of us. Charles exhaled slowly. That's no excuse. I trusted the wrong person. Ethan's expression softened. Now you can trust the right one. 3. The offer. Over dinner, the air felt strangely human. No luxury could mask the simplicity of a child finally smiling again. Charles cleared his throat. I want to offer you something, Ethan. Not as a janitor, but as Grace's guardian caretaker. You'll have your own quarters, full salary, and complete authority over her well-being. Ethan looked surprised. That's a big responsibility. You've already been doing it, Charles said. You're the only one she trusts. Ethan glanced at Grace, who was busy drawing something on a napkin. I'll do it, but I'm not staying for the money. Charles smiled faintly. I didn't think you were. 4. Healing through trust. Weeks passed. Under Ethan's care, Grace began to change. She laughed again, real laughter, the kind that echoed through the hallways. He'd read her bedtime stories, teach her to ride a bike near the garden, even let her paint his work gloves with glitter. For the first time in years, the mansion felt alive. But healing is never linear. One night, Grace had a nightmare. She screamed Olivia's name, trembling uncontrollably. Ethan rushed in, sat beside her, and took her hand. "She can't hurt you anymore," he whispered. Grace looked up, tears glistening. "You promise?" He nodded firmly. "Cross my heart." She leaned against him, her voice small. "Then don't ever leave again." He smiled softly. "Not a chance." 5. Shadows of the past. But peace never lasts long in the Whitmore family. One evening, Ethan overheard a heated phone call from Charles's study. "I told you to handle it quietly." Charles snapped. "If the media finds out, we are finished." Ethan paused at the doorway. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words froze him. A second voice came through the phone, male, sharp, and fearful. "We paid Olivia to keep her quiet about the project, but now she's talking from prison. She wants protection or she'll leak everything." Charles's hand tightened around the phone. "Then make sure she doesn't." Ethan's blood ran cold. What project? Why pay Olivia? When Charles noticed him, his tone changed instantly. "Ethan, everything all right?" Ethan forced a polite nod. "Just checking the lights, sir." But inside, something shifted. Maybe Olivia's cruelty was only the surface. Maybe the real poison ran deeper, straight through the veins of the Whitmore empire. 6. The secret file. Later that night, while cleaning the library with Grace nearby, Ethan noticed a loose floorboard beneath one of the bookshelves. Grace was playing with her doll and humming softly as he knelt to inspect it. Inside the hollow gap, wrapped in an old envelope, he found a stack of documents, contracts, offshore transfers, and a USB drive labeled Project Cora. He slipped it quietly into his pocket, heart racing. That night, after putting Grace to sleep, he plugged the drive into his laptop. What he saw made his stomach twist. Blueprints of experimental housing facilities. Invoices for child welfare donations. But behind the paperwork, reports about illegal medical testing on orphans under Whitmore Foundation's name. Olivia's name appeared on several payment slips. She hadn't been just a nanny, she was part of something far worse. 7. The revelation. Ethan couldn't sleep. He knew exposing this could destroy Charles's empire, and possibly cost lives if the wrong people found out. But doing nothing would make him complicit. The next morning, he confronted Charles. Privately. "Sir, I found something you should explain." Charles frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan placed the printed files on his desk. "I know about Project Cora." Charles stared at the papers in silence. Then, after a long pause, he poured himself a glass of whiskey. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said quietly. "Then tell me it isn't what it looks like," Ethan replied. Charles rubbed his temples. "It started as a humanitarian program. Olivia handled administration. But she and some investors twisted it into something darker, illegal trials under our name. When I found out, I shut it down. But the damage was done." Ethan's voice hardened. "And you paid her to keep silent?" Charles looked up sharply. "Yes, to protect Grace. She threatened to leak photos, fake documents, anything to ruin us." Ethan stepped back, disgusted. "You let her stay with your daughter after that." Charles's voice cracked. "I thought she'd changed. I was wrong." 8. Olivia's return. 2 weeks later, chaos struck again. A van intercepted the police escort transferring Olivia to another facility. She vanished. No trace, no witnesses. News broke across every channel. Former nanny Olivia Crane escapes custody. Grace began trembling again whenever the news played. Ethan turned it off instantly. "She can't find us," he assured her. But deep inside, he wasn't so sure. That night, as rain started to fall again, Ethan double-checked every window and lock. He sat awake in the hallway outside Grace's room, flashlight and phone in hand. At 2 a.m., his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You took everything from me. Now I'll take everything from you." Ethan's breath caught. His pulse quickened. He looked toward Grace's door, safe, still, untouched, and swore under his breath. "Karma's not finished yet," he whispered. "But this time, it's coming for the right person." 9. The Night of Fire. 2 nights later, It happened. A security guard shouted from the south gate. By the time Ethan reached the main hallway, smoke was already curling through the air. The garage was on fire. Flames licked up the walls, spreading fast. "Get Grace!" Ethan yelled, sprinting toward her room. Charles and 2 guards rushed to grab extinguishers, but it was no use. The fire was deliberate, fueled with gasoline. Ethan burst into Grace's room. She was coughing, eyes wide. "Daddy, Ethan," she cried, running into his arms. He wrapped her in a blanket and carried her through the thick smoke, shielding her head. The air was choking, blinding. At the main door, a figure appeared in the rain, Olivia. Her once perfect face twisted with fury, drenched and trembling. "You ruined me," she screamed. "You think you're a hero? You're nothing." Ethan's voice was calm but fierce. "You hurt a child. That's all anyone will remember." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Olivia stepped back, wild-eyed, clutching a lighter. "Then we all burn together." She flicked it, but lightning struck a nearby tree, and the shockwave threw her backward. The lighter fell into the puddle, hissing out. When police arrived, she was on the ground, sobbing, defeated. The mansion smoldered behind them. 10. Calm as flames. Days later, the investigation closed. Olivia faced a long list of charges: abuse, arson, and conspiracy. The Whitmore Foundation's secrets began to surface too. But this time, Charles didn't hide. He held a press conference, admitting the cover-up, exposing the investors, and donating half his wealth to rebuild orphan programs legally. Reporters hailed Ethan as the whistleblower who forced a billionaire to change. But Ethan didn't care about fame. He only cared that Grace was smiling again, this time truly free. 11. Father and daughter. Months passed. The mansion was repaired, smaller this time, simpler. Ethan stayed, not as a janitor or employee, but as part of the family. Grace and Lily became inseparable. Charles often joined them on the garden bench, humbled, human at last. One afternoon, Grace looked at Ethan and asked, "What's karma?" He smiled. "It's when life gives back what you give others, good or bad." She thought for a moment. "Then you got good karma." Ethan chuckled. "Maybe, but the real gift is seeing you safe." She hugged him tightly. "Then maybe I got good karma too, because I got you." The calm after the ashes. Months passed since the fire. The once grand Whitmore mansion now stood quieter, simpler, stripped of its vanity. Charles sold off the unnecessary luxury wings, keeping only the main home. What remained was filled not with diamonds or portraits, but with laughter, graces, mostly. She was healing. Therapy, art, and the warmth of Ethan and Lily had brought her back to life. Every evening, they sat together in the garden, the sunset dripping gold over the pond. Lily would braid Grace's hair, and Ethan would fix old toys Charles bought from thrift stores. Sometimes, Grace would whisper, "I used to be afraid to laugh." Ethan would smile softly, then laugh louder now. "You earned it." 2. Olivia's trial. The court trial for Olivia Crane drew national attention. Inside the courtroom, she sat with her lawyer, her once perfect appearance replaced by exhaustion and bitterness. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. When the footage of her abuse was replayed, the audience fell silent. Her voice, cold, cruel, echoed in the room as the world watched her slap and threaten a helpless child. Grace wasn't present, but Ethan was, standing at the back, quiet, arms folded. Olivia's attorney tried to twist the story. "My client was under mental distress, manipulated by the wealthy environment she worked in." But the judge interrupted. No environment justifies harming a child. The verdict came swiftly. 15 years imprisonment, no parole. As the guards led her away, Olivia's eyes found Ethan in the crowd. "You think you've won," she hissed, "but you're just another servant who'll be forgotten." Ethan didn't even blink. "No, Olivia. I'll be remembered for protecting a child. You'll be remembered for breaking one." For the first time, she had no comeback, only silence. 3. Grace's drawing. The next week, Grace presented Ethan with a small painting she'd made in art class. It showed 4 people standing under a bright sun, a man, 2 little girls, and another man with his hand on the first man's shoulder. "That's you, me, Lily, and Mr. Whitmore," she said proudly. We are all family now. Ethan's throat tightened. He framed the drawing and hung it in the living room, above the fireplace where ashes had once marked the walls. Charles saw it one evening and smiled quietly. "Funny," he said. "I spent my life building a mansion, and she rebuilt it with 4 crayons." 4. The redemption of Charles Whitmore. Charles wasn't the same man anymore. He no longer wore arrogance like a crown. Instead, he spent his mornings volunteering at children's homes, the same kind of orphanages his foundation had once exploited. He turned Project Cora into something real, a safe house program for abused children, renamed Grace Haven. Reporters called it a redemption act. But when asked, Charles only said, "I'm not fixing my image. I'm fixing my soul." He often told Ethan, "You showed me what real fatherhood looks like. I had money, but no heart. You had struggle, but never lost yours." Ethan replied, "We both learned the hard way that the only real wealth is peace." 5. The whisper of karma. One rainy afternoon, Ethan received a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a folded piece of prison stationery, signed by Olivia Crane. "You destroyed my life, but maybe I deserved it. I think about Grace every night. The way she looked at me. I wanted power. You showed me how weak I really was. Tell her I'm sorry, not because I want forgiveness, but because I finally learned what pain feels like." Ethan didn't reply. He simply burned the letter, watching the ashes drift into the wind. That was karma, silent, patient, and complete. 6. A father's lesson. One evening, Ethan and Lily walked Grace to the hill behind the mansion, where wildflowers bloomed. Grace was learning to ride her bicycle, pink, wobbly, but determined. When she finally managed to stay balanced, Ethan clapped and shouted, "You did it." Grace laughed, wind in her hair. "I didn't fall this time." "See," he said. "Sometimes we fall before we learn how to move forward." She smiled. "Like you did." He nodded. "Like I did." Charles joined them moments later, carrying lemonade. The 3 adults and 2 children sat on the grass, the golden hour turning their shadows long and warm. For the first time, none of them were haunted anymore. The TV interview. Months later, a famous news anchor invited Charles and Ethan for a live interview about Grace Haven. Millions tuned in. The host smiled. "Mr. Whitmore, you're known for your empire, but now you're known for your compassion. What changed you?" Charles glanced at Ethan, then said, "A janitor did." The studio gasped softly. Ethan smiled modestly, but Charles continued, "He reminded me that love doesn't need a title. It just needs courage." The crowd erupted in applause. Ethan simply said, "Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the loudest echo." 8. Olivia's karma. Years passed. Olivia served her time in silence. She refused interviews, ignored journalists, and stayed out of the spotlight. When she was finally released, she had nowhere to go. No friends, no family, no money. She applied for jobs. Every door closed. Every background check brought up her past. One day, while walking through the city, she saw a billboard. Grace Haven Foundation. Every child deserves a safe home. It showed Grace's smiling face beside Ethan and Charles. Olivia stood in the rain, tears mixing with the water. She whispered, "That should have been me helping her, not hurting her." Karma had no vengeance left to give, only reflection. She disappeared into the crowd, just another face washed away by regret. 9. The last sunset. Years later, Grace, now 16, stood with Ethan at the same hilltop where she learned to ride her bike. "I still remember when you caught me that night," she said softly. "If you hadn't come, I don't think I'd be here." Ethan smiled, his hand now touched with silver. "You were always stronger than you thought." She looked at him with gratitude. "You were my guardian, not just my hero." He laughed. "Heroes wear capes. I just wore a janitor's uniform." Grace shook her head. "That's what made you real." Down the hill, Lily waved, calling them for dinner. Charles sat near the porch, reading, his once busy life now reduced to simple joys. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in pink and gold. Ethan put an arm around Grace and whispered, "See that? That's what peace looks like." Grace smiled. "Then we finally found it." 10. Epilogue: The Lesson of Karma. In the years that followed, Grace Haven expanded across the country. Shelters, schools, and safe homes for children who'd lost their voices. Ethan became its silent backbone, never seeking credit, always working quietly in the background. Charles became its face, funding it with his fortune and faith. Grace became its heart, telling her story to inspire others. And Olivia remained the lesson. That cruelty might win for a moment, but kindness always wins the war. Because in the end, karma doesn't rush. It waits, and when it arrives, it restores balance.